Guys, I have been really excited to make this video. The Batman might just be my favorite Batman movie of all time. Now, for those of you out there that want to avoid spoilers, don't worry. I'll give you a heads up when we head into spoiler territory, so these are just my spoiler-free thoughts to kick things off. The past few weeks have been an intense, albeit fascinating journey into a franchise I once knew very little about. I have watched through 12 Batman movies and read a countless number of comics leading up to this brand new outing, and I am so pleased to say it was worthwhile. Not just because it's opened my eyes to the brilliance of such an iconic character, Batman, but also because it's allowed me to appreciate these movie adaptations on a whole nother level. And that couldn't be truer than with this film, The Batman. This movie feels like a test of my ability to point out what comic is being adapted at any given moment, and given how much I freaked out at being able to do just a little bit of that with Batman Begins, it should come as no surprise to you all that I had a lot of fun with this one. This is unquestionably the most comic accurate a Batman movie has ever been, both in terms of its tone and its design. Gotham City is the bleakest it has ever looked, filled with fantastic gothic architecture against a backdrop of grimy urban areas like the most rundown sections of New York City. It is smoky, filthy, and right off the panels of many of the comics I've been reading currently. Stunningly shot by the wonderful Greg Fraser, whose work has already blown me away on Dune and Rogue One, and you have the best looking Batman film to date. And with this deeply noir setting comes a deeply noir story. In many ways, The Batman doesn't feel like a traditional superhero flick, and having watched 12 movies in preparation for this, it was a welcome change of pace. Across its 3-hour runtime, there's not a whole lot of action. This is a slow burn detective thriller in the same vein as David Fincher's Seven, or more directly, it's a murder mystery taking heavy cues from the Long Halloween and Dark Victory comics with some subtle nods to even Batman Hush. It shows Batman, the world's greatest detective, actually doing detective things as the primary driving force of the film, coupled with Batman's introspective narrative that underpins so many moments across this film, and you have such a phenomenally faithful incarnation of this character. And so, I think regardless of whether you like this take the best or not, it is unquestionably right off of the pages, and personally, I can't praise it enough for that. Thankfully, it is also a great film in its own right, and not just a series of references in a row to appease fans. The cat and mouse game between the Riddler and Batman is incredibly compelling and thematically competent, and the way Matt Reeves and the rest of the writing team have constructed a young, misguided Bruce Wayne is an absolute joy to watch. Topped off by such an oppressive score by Michael Giacchino, and you have yourself one hell of a Batman movie. It's my feeling that this is a movie that will appeal to fans old and new, while also being approachable for ones who might not necessarily love superhero films. So if you or your family haven't seen it, it's a thrilling ride, the likes of which I don't believe you will soon forget. Now, spoiler warning. If you do not wish to be spoiled, then I think this is time for you to leave and come back once you've seen the film. I will be touching on almost every major plot point in this film, seriously, like everything, and there's a lot to cover, so let's get right into it. The central conflict. The plot of this film is made up of several major factors. At the forefront of the story, you have the Riddler, who's taking out Gotham's corrupt elite via some truly twisted methods, throwing out riddles that Batman must solve in time. Intertwined in this is the story of Carmine Falcone, the Penguin, and their involvement in Gotham City's corrupt police force. If the premise of a killer on the loose taking down mob assets sounds familiar to you, then you'd be correct. For all intents and purposes, this is the exact plot of the Long Halloween comic, and considering they were literally handing out issues of #1 at the cinema, they're not shy about sharing that inspiration. This time, however, there is no holiday killer, but instead we have Paul Dano's Riddler, who, despite not having much screen time at all, gives one hell of a powerful performance. The incarnation of the character here is startlingly different from much of his comic book appearances in terms of tone. In Catwoman When in Rome, he's kind of a dorky loser, and even in comics more central to him like those found in New 52 or Rebirth, he's still a bit too campy and extravagant for a live-action movie such as this. And as a result, what Reeves has done with this character is quite the departure, and yet also not. The Riddler in this movie is presented much like Jigsaw from the Saw series. He puts them in awful situations and leaves riddles that may allow some of them to be saved. Yet, at the same time, his reasoning is 100% in line with what's found in the comics. He's beaten down by society, he feels unnoticed and bitter, and his sense of self-worth about his own intelligence and desire to be noticed grows to psychotic degrees, which was exactly what I found when reading the 4 of a Kind comic for my Batman Forever review. However, it has been given a more grounded, modern twist. Riddler's revealed to have a small online following, only 500 people, of which he manages to radicalize only a few for his deeds. And yet, that's just enough to do significant damage. It's not hard to see the analog here to real-life cases like Elliot Rodger, a deeply disturbed young killer who found himself glorified by similarly messed up people who felt slighted by society. Batman, and by extension Bruce, serves as a parallel to this take. This is only year 2 of his career and he hasn't quite worked out what the Batman needs to be or even how to really function as Bruce Wayne. There's no suave ladies man on show here. This is a very young, tortured individual who repeatedly calls himself Vengeance. He feels let down by what the city has become, what's happened to his people, and wants revenge on those who made it this way. Exactly like our villain, the Riddler. Thematically, this is so important and one of the coolest parts about this movie. One of the major turning points is a section towards the end where the Riddler's in custody and Batman rushes over, believing his identity has been sussed out due to the countless Bruce Wayne indications all throughout his apartment. Only it turns out that wasn't the case. In a brilliant bit of misdirection, it's revealed that the Riddler wanted to team up with Batman to take down Bruce Wayne.
Bruce Wayne.
Someone he saw as the embodiment of corruption that deeply affected his childhood as an orphan. Another clear parallel, by the way. This interrogation scene is spectacular. It's revealed that Riddler saw Batman as an ally. His warped sense of reality led him to believe that they were working together all of this time to clean up Gotham's corruption. The riddles weren't meant to be there for Batman to stop the next death, they were there for him to solve, thus moving pieces into place to allow for his next plan to play out successfully. And so, now that you have Batman, someone Riddler saw as a kindred spirit, telling him he's a maniac, psychotic, and wrong on every account, he's left with this worldview completely shattered. And Dano's acting here just blew me away. He is completely unrestrained. All of the composure and intelligence that marked his performance up until this point seeps away. And what's left is a pathetic lunatic quite literally screeching. It's the moment where Riddler's quote-unquote mask drops off and we finally get to see the sniveling loser we know and love from the comics. It's such a fascinating portrayal of this character. Most critically though, it's a powerful moment of resilience for both characters, particularly Batman, who begins to come to terms with how wrong his notions of vengeance truly are. In an earlier section of this film, Bruce meets a man who is beyond done with Gotham's societal failings, and this seemingly one-off character poetically wraps back around to become one of Riddler's radicalized thugs who, upon being recognized by Batman, states, "I'm vengeance," finally making it click that Batman needs to be a symbol of hope and not one that inspires misguided copycats seeking revenge. It plays off a common idea that Batman may very well be a large part of creating many of the villains he so desperately tries to take off the streets. It's a fitting part of this early story for the Batman character, and I absolutely loved the way it was handled. It's what this film's story hinges on, and they not only pulled this narrative trick off, but they set the standard in my opinion. This is everything this film needed to be and more. Okay, now time to talk about the inner workings. Unsurprisingly, across this 3-hour runtime, there's a lot more at play than just the core concepts I've outlined so far. One of the other central stories that underpins Riddler's plans is about the mob and their involvement with not only Gotham's police, but its political structure too. At the center of this story is Carmine Falcone, Selina Kyle, the Penguin, and Bruce Wayne. Not Batman, but Wayne himself. It's here that the film's numerous comic influences come out in full force, and it even included a comic reference that AJ never expected to be relevant and so never told me to read beforehand. And that comic is 2012's Batman Earth 1, and it takes elements from it that really caught me off guard as someone who only familiarized himself with the more conventional Batman stories. In this film, Alfred's not the old butler I'm used to. He's younger and much tougher with a military background portrayed wonderfully by Andy Serkis. But most critically, what it takes from Earth 1 is the plot point that Martha Wayne,
Why did you say that name?
spent time at Arkham and her mother suffered a mental breakdown, killing her husband and then herself. It merges this with a plot point from The Long Halloween where Thomas Wayne saves Falcone's life and owes him a favor. As a result, it creates this plot point where Bruce believes his father to be corrupt, working with Falcone to have a reporter killed who was going to spill the beans on Martha's dark past, an act that would ultimately cause Martha and Thomas's demise. And with a film like this, which is built upon shattering preconceived notions of the world, it's a perfect source to draw from. With the Riddler revealing this to the city, it completely devastates Bruce, who was entirely under the impression his parents were saints. He loses faith in himself and his reasons for what he's doing, and he also loses faith in Alfred, believing he's been lied to his whole life. It results in one of the most touching scenes in the film where Serkis and Pattinson really get to flex their acting chops as they reconcile, and Alfred explains the reality of this situation. Bruce's father never meant to have anyone killed. In a moment of weakness, he turned to Falcone to try and scare the reporter, only for Falcone to go all the way. He explains that Thomas wanted to go hand himself in and tell the police everything, only to end up dead. Possibly at the hands of Falcone, possibly by pure coincidence by a desperate criminal. It's left unanswered. Something also present in The Long Halloween. It's a different take from the tale of Joe Chill, the man responsible for their deaths in the Nolan movies, and a huge number of Batman comics dating back all the way to the original series in the 40s. To have this big unknown cast a shadow over the motivator behind the Batman is hugely relevant here and ties into the conclusion of this movie, that Batman should not be a symbol of vengeance. Are you seeing how everything is tying together yet? And I think that's what makes this movie so different from all the other adaptations over the years. So many of the live-action Batman movies are focused on the villains, but this movie is so much more focused and grounded around the character of Batman that it's hard to find ways to touch on anyone else succinctly. Selina Kyle plays a prominent role here, for example, taking on the look of her character from Batman Year One, but with a backstory straight out of Dark Victory and the New 52, with Carmine Falcone being her actual father. He even gets his iconic face scratches too, which I thought was pretty dope. I think what she does best for the narrative though is the way she indirectly confronts Bruce Wayne about his background. She pushes Batman on his reactions to certain situations, saying it's clear he grew up rich, and it's an aspect of the character that's seldom touched on. How does someone who grew up so deeply privileged even begin to understand the people driven to crime out of reasons like desperation? She facilitates the way this film makes Batman feel human, and this is such an early take on the character. He routinely messes up, he can't just tank bullets, and he often relies on the help of others to set him straight. Outside of Selina, the most prominent person to provide said help is James Gordon. In many ways, he's the main character right alongside Batman, sharing possibly equal screen time. Jeffrey Wright is such a great person for this role too, by the way. He's got that real hard edge about him, much like the Year One comic, showing off how someone so good can handle himself in a department so crooked. He helps ground Batman, while from a filmmaking standpoint simultaneously serves to showcase Batman's genius. They share crime scenes together, tackling clues and riddles, and where Gordon and the other police officers struggle, Batman's there to piece things together in an instant. Their buddy cop antics are also a huge source of comedy in this film. Despite how dark this film can be, and often is, it also manages to feel appropriately funny without jarring against the overall tone. The thumb drive gag, the pull your punch gag, the classic disappearing act. They have such awesome chemistry together. A chemistry I don't think has ever been committed to the screen so convincingly. And with that said, I think the only real place that this film falters is in its choice of finale. As I mentioned earlier, this film is a slow burn detective thriller for about 2.5 hours of its runtime. Its action is fairly minimal, with an emphasis on the cerebral aspects of each character. It barely feels like a superhero film, and yet, when the Riddler's plan is blown open, it immediately transitions into a city-wide level threat. It's a huge-scale event on par with The Dark Knight Rises' final act that feels a little at odds with how low-key the film has been prior to this point. I think, by and large, though, this is a small complaint. While it is a large event, it's not a Snyder-level punch-a-thon special effects extravaganza. The way the film focuses itself is concentrated enough that it comes across more like a slice of a disaster movie more so than anything else, and what it does thematically is what's most important after all. The fact is, Batman may have won in the sense that he's learned what he needs to be a symbol for Gotham, but loses the conflict in this film. He didn't catch the Riddler, he let himself be caught. He solved the riddles too late. Gotham City is left completely destroyed, parts are cut off, people are left desperate and isolated. It's like the setup for the comic No Man's Land, and that's hugely exciting for the future of this franchise if Reeves continues at the helm. And that's where my excitement comes from here, for the future. The future of this franchise has me incredibly excited off the back of this wonderful film. There are a huge number of hints towards future content throughout, and I can't wait to see how they play out. I've not even mentioned Colin Farrell's Penguin, despite the fact that it's one of the most standout performances in this film, and some of the best transformative acting in recent memory. The fact he's getting his own HBO spin-off series that focuses harder on the corrupt aspects of Gotham's police system is so exciting. Then of course there's also the part where Batman injects himself with this green fluid. Was it just adrenaline? Was it venom hinting at Bane or the addiction story from the comics of the same name? Heck, there's even what appears to be a Joker cameo at one point. This film is just packed full of detail. I cannot emphasize enough just how much I adore it. I do genuinely think this may very well be my favorite Batman film to date. Now, that may be recency bias talking, but the way it brings the source material to the big screen is just so uncompromising and perfectly accurate. And with such a compelling story and awesome performances to boot, I can just barely fault it. If I had to put a score on it, I would probably go with a 9 out of 10, a strong 9 out of 10. I think also because of this, it means retroactively it affects some of the scores that came before, most critically sending Halle Berry's Catwoman into the negatives.
Justice.
In conclusion, it is my firm belief that old-time comic fans will love this incredible 3-hour spectacular that doesn't feel at all like 3 hours. As always, subscribe for more reviews like this, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks for watching.